Okay. All right, thank you everyone for coming. Can you hear me okay? Is this too loud? Good? All right. So, a little blurb about vaccination law to get you acquainted with what we're going to be talking about today. Vaccinations are one of the most important achievements in medicine and public health, and are responsible for saving millions of lives. Vaccination law and unsuccessful challenges to vaccination laws go back more than a century in the U.S. While new vaccinations have been developed, controversy often comes in their wake. So today we have with us two experts in the field of vaccination law. Dr. Chris Pezzullo, right here to my left, is the Chief Health Officer of the Maine Department of Health and Human Services. He has been practicing medicine for nearly 20 years in Maine as a pediatrician. Dr. Pezzullo is a graduate of the University of New England College of Osteopathic Medicine and has been recognized as a diplomat in the American Board of Pediatrics and the National Board of Osteopathic Medical Examiners. Dr. Pezzullo previously served as the Medical Director of the Division of Population Health for the Maine Center for Disease Control and Prevention, beginning in 2012. Prior to joining state government, he was a Chief Medical Officer for University Healthcare from 2008 to 2012. Dr. Pezzullo is affiliated with the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Osteopathic Association, the American College of Osteopathic Pediatricians, the Maine Osteopathic Association, and the Maine Medical Association. He is a former president of the Maine Osteopathic Association and a graduate of the Hanley Leadership Fellowship. He and his family reside in Cape Elizabeth. Mr. Kenneth Albert is the Director and Chief Operating Officer of the Maine Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Prior to this appointment, he served as the Director of the Division of Licensing and Regulatory Services within the Maine Department of Health and Human Services. Before joining the department in March 2012, Ken practiced law for several years, specializing in health law, professional licensing, and regulatory and compliance law. He has also directed compliance efforts for a large healthcare organization, developing a new compliance program for several business lines. Ken's background is rich in medical experience, including 17 years of clinical practice in emergency and intensive care settings. In that time, Ken served as Director of Emergency Services at Central Maine Medical Center, as the Administrator of Occupational Health Center affiliated with CMMC, and as a Lewiston Site Manager for Life Flight of Maine. Additionally, Ken spent 5 years as a traveling critical care nurse working in metropolitan, rural, and tribal communities across the United States. He has also served for several years as an adjunct faculty member at New England College, where he taught legal issues in healthcare administration. A graduate of the CMMC School of Nursing, Ken moved to earn a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing at the University of Southern Maine, magna cum laude, and a degree of Juris Doctor from the University of Maine School of Law with honors in health law. The Maine Law Policy Group and Maine Law are proud to sponsor this event, part of a series of health law and other policy issues. We are particularly pleased to be hosting this event for two reasons. Firstly, because Ken Albert is one of our own grads, and secondly, because the law school and the Muskie School recently launched an accelerated JD and PH program. If anyone wants more info, please see Professor Jenny Riggins. The next event in the series will be held in November and will cover physician-assisted death and the right to die with dignity. Please join us on the discussion, Twitter with Vaccinations hashtag, and please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Thank you for the introduction. Made me sound old. But thank you very much for having us here, Eliza, and making all the coordinations, and Professor Riggins, Dean. Very much enjoyed being asked back to Alma Mater here to share some of my expertise with you, and we'd really like to have it be more of a dialogue. So while we want to have plenty of time for questions at the end, please feel free if something strikes you as we're dialoguing here today to raise your hand, and we'll entertain questions and comments. I understand that there was distributed by email some case law, recent challenges to the jurisprudence on the issue of immunizations, and so there'll be no quizzing, no questions being posed of anybody here in the room, but I really appreciate that, because really the sentinel case that we rely on in the United States is Jacobson v. Massachusetts. Massachusetts was really the first state in the country to impose state law mandating vaccinations. And that's why the challenge, if you look at the case law history, you can see a lot of the challenges coming out of the state of Massachusetts. And in that case, it was really the challenge between the First Amendment, religious freedoms, and where the court decided there was really no personal choice exemption that was going to be authorized under the law. And then the court relied upon 10th Amendment, citing the state's authority or police powers to enforce mandatory vaccination laws. And the personal exemption laws, I thought was interesting. The rationale the court gave was that absent the assertion of police powers, that it would strip the power of the legislative branch to protect its citizenry. And they went into some great dialogue around that, and I find that fascinating, particularly as we observe kind of rights, personal rights and privacy rights evolve over time. So Jacobson really speaks to the police powers, which are powers not delegated to the United States in the Constitution, nor are they prohibited by the Constitution, are reserved to the states. And then, you know, it was in the first law in Mass was in 1855. The first challenge wasn't until almost 60 years later, so 1905. And I would posit to you, anybody would venture a guess as to why that is. No answer is incorrect here. Just anybody, well, why 60 years to challenge a state and saying you must become vaccinated? I think, hi.
I would guess that the state didn't do it. So the law was passed at the state level that allowed the local health inspector or whatever to, on his own, decide that a vaccination was required at this time. So in 1902, there was an outbreak of smallpox, so the health inspector did institute this law and started going door to door. And I don't know if there hadn't been any previous outbreaks, but that would be my guess.
I think you're spot on, and I think that the rationale can be extended even further to say that when there's disease around, as a society, we tend to want disease to go away. And there was disease around, okay, for many, many years. Smallpox, polio in the 1900s, and I mean that just spawned a culture of accepting vaccinations in order to eliminate and eradicate disease. And in those two instances, for example, smallpox has been eradicated worldwide, and polio nearly eradicated, certainly in the Western Hemisphere. But there are some reported cases around the world, but nearly eradicated. So the answer to that really is, if there's disease, we don't want it, and we don't want our children impacted by it. So I think that's, and some of the challenges we're getting from the anti-immunization, anti-vaccination folks are really based on the, you know, we don't have that much disease in our society anymore. So why, therefore, then are you asking us to, you know, vaccinate our children? And I would submit that it just is going to take an outbreak like occurred in California this year with the measles outbreak. And we also had our first death, measles death, in 12 years. Those types of events that occur will encourage or re-encourage immunization, vaccination. Just real quickly, further evolution of the case law, Zook v. King in 1922, the Supreme Court denied a due process or 14th Amendment challenge. So, like, you know, law is a lawyer-driven process, right? So, we're trying to find our hook to hang our hat on in every case. And so, you know, First Amendment challenge, 14th Amendment challenge, and then Prince v. Massachusetts in 1944, which was actually a child labor case, really set the limits on religious freedom of an individual's expression of liberty, and was based on the community risk for harm or ill health. And that case really said that neither rights of religion nor rights of parenthood are beyond limitation. I think that, and that finding is really prevalent in the challenges against mandatory immunizations and vaccinations today. Prince also put forth something that Dr. Pezzullo will talk about a little bit here, but parents' patriot as well, where the state's power to act as a parent of any child or individual who's in need of protection is the basis upon which states may mandate vaccinations. So you see police powers of the 10th Amendment, and then you see parents patriae born of those powers as well in the Princeton, Massachusetts case. In 1990, more recently, more contemporary case, the Employment Division for DHHS in Oregon versus Smith, the Supreme Court rejected the compelling interest test, which again, really an interesting evolution here, for a new standard that was really lowered the bar, making it much easier for states to prevail against challenges. I won't get into the facts of that, but it is really the basis upon which new challenges are being tested, and which you received information about one. Phillips v. New York City in 2015, which really was about a social distancing policy. In other words, if your child's not been immunized or vaccinated against diseases, certain diseases, then they are going to be isolated from other children who are in the schools who either could not be immunized based on a medical condition or who chose not to be immunized. And again, in that case, really, I think that's a case where the court rejected, they rejected certiorari in that case. And it's really, again, it's a First Amendment argument fails against the 10th Amendment policing powers argument. But I think another interesting challenge that occurred in 2015 was a case called Worthman v. Mingo County Board of Education. And that, the Supreme Court again denied cert. It was a case based in 2009, federal district court judge granted summary judgment on 11th Amendment grounds. So not 10th Amendment, but 11th Amendment grounds. And citing that the Board of Education was under state control, therefore the immunities of the state attached to the Board of Education. So that's going to open up a new door, I think, this is in 2015, so that's going to open up a new door for some legal challenges, I think. I think the courts will always be able to fall back upon the 10th Amendment, but I found it really interesting that this court chose to focus its efforts around the 11th Amendment. In January of 2015, there were 58 bills in 24 states attempting to limit the rights of parents or assert parents' patriae. 5 of those bills, 5 of the 58 were here in Maine. New England values its rights to parenthood. We don't like to be told very often what to do or how to do it. And as I said earlier, the U.S. had its first measles fatality in 12 years. And Maine increased MMR immunizations by 6.2%, the best increase in the nation from previous year to 97% of all children compared to 91.5% nationally. So that's an impressive improvement. And I'll let Dr. Pezzullo, if you just want to talk about why you think that improvement occurred in the state of Maine.
First, I'll ask the group if they have any thoughts or suggestions on why. One of the things I will say is that it seems like the increase in MMR coverage has been in the 0 to 3-year-old population, which is great because that's the leading indicator. Eventually, they'll be adults. There has been, some people believe that press around the measles case that occurred in California, and I don't know if you guys remember, there was actually a visitor from Europe who was here last April. He was actually in Maine, he was staying in Massachusetts, but he was in Maine in the Kittery outlets for a day, and he had measles and he was contagious at the time, so we needed to notify people. But I think it's interesting that so many people are opting out or thinking about opting out of vaccines. That's, I think what's happening is that there's these little inroads, maybe, of actual disease. And parents are having to think about, what does that mean for my family? It's kind of like what Ken said, if disease is around, people don't want disease. If there's no disease around, it's really easy to either forget or to just not know about what those vaccines provide. Want me to kick off a little further, or you?
Go for it.
Okay. Just wanted to give a couple of other statistics about Maine. So do you guys know where Maine ranks for 0 to 3 for immunization rates in the nation? Just throw in. We're in the middle. Anybody else? We're first.
Wow.
As of this year.
First this year. We are actually 10th, though, in the nation for the number of families that opt out of vaccines. I call that the Maine conundrum. Because really, how could Maine have such great vaccination rates and have this really high opt-out rate? I guess I'm going to posit that Maine likes to be fairly independent. But at least in the last few years, from my perspective, they seem to be making a choice that seems reasonable. I think you guys, I don't know if you've talked at all about philosophical or religious exemptions for vaccine. Is that something that has been discussed?
And Chris, I would just add to that,
Sure.
and we do this a lot, we just bounce off each other. So when that was an improvement, so in 2013, Maine was the 4th highest state in the nation for parents rejecting vaccines. So in my estimation, the improvement there is based on providers' engagement with parents and really taking the time to discuss with parents and guardians of children the risks and benefits of vaccinations. And so in numbers, as far as pure numbers, that was a fall from 766 kids who were actually parents who were rejecting vaccinations to 504. So Maine went from 5.2 to 4.4%, but the national average was really 1.7% of children go unvaccinated. So we still have a long way to go.
I have a question for Dr. Pezzullo. So as a pediatrician, I'm assuming you have this conversation with families a lot, and maybe Maine is not the best question area for this, but how often does this come up where you have to, say, no, you can't get autism from a vaccination, or no, you definitely should be vaccinated, you tried all of these things. How often do you get a pushback from families?
Well, let me put it to you this way. Let's assume that every time parents are pregnant, there's a new parent arriving that they come for a meet with. So a lot of times, I don't know if this happens with other providers, pediatricians, there's like this shopping that goes around. I don't know if there are any parents here, where if it's your first child, you want to try to find the pediatrician or the family doc who kind of works with your, the way that you think. And so then we have these meet-withs, and so there's this like 15-minute pro bono visit that occurs where we discuss, what's important to me, what's important to them, how we can work together. I would say probably 80% of those visits, there's a discussion about vaccinations. That is like key to a lot of parents. Maybe up to a quarter of parents will say to me things like, I really believe in vaccinations, I was vaccinated for everything, I trust exactly what you say. That's the small group. The larger group is, I have a lot of concerns about vaccinations, could you help me to understand what I'm reading? Could you help me to understand how safe it is? Are there some that are more necessary than others? So that's the majority, yeah. The one thing I will say regarding those opt-out rates is, I guess the question for Maine is, do we legislate that there are no philosophical or religious exemptions for vaccinations, or do we keep them both in? Some states have neither. Some states offer one. Like, for example, Vermont, I think you guys got that case law about Vermont. Vermont now allows religious exemption only, not philosophical exemption. And so I think the article stated something like lots of Vermonters are now getting religion because they have to kind of stand behind a different tenet or principle. Again, it's one of those rhetorical questions. I don't know which is better. In Maine, either are allowed, and yet in Maine, the rate of opt-out is dropping. So maybe we should leave it to the parents. I'm not sure.
I might disagree with that, but I'm not a pediatrician. So Maine is one of 18 states that allow philosophical exemption. Only 2 states in the country that do not allow any exemptions at all, and that's Mississippi and West Virginia. And so there's state case law in those states that really been interesting to read as well if you're so inclined. And then really the basis upon which the state courts are upholding no exemption being available are the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So individual versus community, kind of that debate.
And I actually have a couple of questions that I want to stimulate discussion at the end. But before we do that, I don't know if you guys have seen any articles in the lay press around pediatricians firing patients around vaccination issues. Do you know what that's about? Like,
well, I've seen it in the context that pediatricians are pro-vaccination, for lack of a better term, and if they have patients who are opting out of vaccinations for whatever reason, they choose not to treat their children as a part of their stance philosophically.
gut level, what is that? How does that feel to you?
I mean, I have 2 kids and I vaccinate them because
You don't have to
they're
tell me that, it's okay. Thank you, thank you.
I think the doctor should have that right if it clashes with what they think is best. But I also think the parents have the right to seek out a doctor that fits their family
And their values.
value.
Sure. Anybody else have any input around that idea?
It doesn't really seem to be addressing the issue. Instead of like meeting the patient halfway and figuring out a common ground, it's just like, well, then go somewhere else. So,
Right, and I guess the question is, where do they go next? And what if all